Welcome to another edition of Carnivore Bites. I'm your host, Jeff Sherman, along with Dr. Eric E. Lopkin. And, you know, especially over the last year, you think you kind of seen it all, haven't you, Dr. Lopkin? But this is another first. We have the party that's basically committed to democracy, fighting against the very institution that is the Republican Party that is going to destroy democracy. Now is the first presidential candidate that has never gotten a vote.
Yeah, it is absolutely amazing what is going on. I mean, the past 2 weeks, we started last week with the assassination attempt of Donald Trump. Now we've got Joe Biden. The house of cards has fallen apart, and he has been forced. Let's be clear about this. He was forced out of the campaign by the Democratic Party.
Without any question.
There are a lot of folks in the media saying, oh, he did the heroic thing and did what was right for the country by... No, he was forced out. And then, without a single primary voter, without a single Democratic voter being consulted, they anointed Kamala Harris. She's the first presidential candidate ever that is running for office that was not chosen by a single voter. She didn't get any votes in 2020. She pulled out of the campaign before the first primary. She did not run in this primary, which was a joke because the DNC didn't allow people to really primary Biden. And now she is the presumptive nominee of the Democratic Party.
Completely unbelievable. I think it blows up the whole threat to democracy. Of course, they're just enamored with it and probably won't move away from it. But yes, I 100% agree. Too bad for them if they didn't push out RFK Jr., who eviscerated them in an address. Talking about how they are actually the threat to democracy. He would actually be ahead of Donald Trump, but now they have...
He would be. Had they allowed RFK to be in the primary, there was a strong possibility that he could be the Democratic frontrunner and he could have beaten Donald Trump. Now, they're doubling down on, oh, we have to stop Donald Trump. He's a threat to democracy. Really? The Democratic Party...
I think, wait, Dr. Lopkin, you got your analysis on that. I mean, am I correct in saying, unless, you know, a dimwit from MSNBC, I got that crap, but anyone with half an IQ, like above, like maybe room temperature, doesn't that whole thing blow up?
Oh, yes, it does. It absolutely blows up. Let's take a look at what the Democrats have done over the past 12 years. Okay, under Obama, they weaponized the IRS against conservative groups because Obama considered them political enemies. They weaponized the FBI against the Associated Press because they dared cover things that Obama didn't want covered. They lied to a FISA court to get an illegal wiretap warrant so they could spy on a presidential candidate. They created a fake dossier to try to convince the American public that that same presidential candidate was in league with the Russians. They colluded with social media and the mainstream media to discourage anybody from looking into Hunter Biden's laptop. They hid the fact that the president of the United States had cognitive disorders and was not capable of running the country. Now,
before you move on, though, isn't that one of the biggest, you talk about, not conspiracies, threats to democracy's biggest assault on American democracy, makes water look like a joke. Everyone was catfished. I mean, explain to me, Dr. Lopkin, how this party, the Democratic Party, starting with Obama, by the way, has basically evolved or de-evolved from a party that has any interest in America or America's security or prosperity and solely focused on power and power for power's sake. Because that's how it is.
Yeah, I can't explain how it happened. It is amazing. Carl Bernstein, one of the two reporters that broke the Watergate story, recently said this is a bigger scandal than Watergate. And so after doing all of that, now they have installed a presidential candidate that nobody voted for. No doubt, they just appointed her. We talked a lot in 2016 about the Democrats trying to do a coronation for Hillary Clinton. That's exactly what they just did with Kamala Harris. So you tell me which party is the threat to democracy?
Yeah, I didn't know. It's very interesting. Be careful what you wish for, because I don't know how of course, they're going to continue it because they're fixated on it. So I don't see how it works at all, quite frankly. And, on the Kamala situation, what do you think of this? I'm going to ask you, I'm not going to say a word. How do you think this evolved? Okay, there's a really big honeymoon. They've unburdened, to use her terminology, they've unburdened her from, or their party from Uncle Joe, who was blown out. I mean, it's not cognitive decline, it's cognitive incapability. It's a disaster. So how does this whole thing play out? I mean, there is a honeymoon now. There's more. At least they can be somewhat hopeful, but I'll just give it to you.
There is a honeymoon period now, and I don't know how long the honeymoon is going to last. Originally, I had thought that the honeymoon was going to last until the convention, and then the convention would actually push her a little bit up, because generally there's a post-convention bump for every candidate.
Without a doubt.
So that was what I had initially expected. And the media has you believing that everything is kumbaya, all the Democrats are in lockstep, but just over the last 2 days, since they said she's locked up enough delegates, we had one mega donor, a real estate developer in Florida. I'm forgetting his name, but he donated $1 million to the Joe Biden campaign. He has come out and said, this is a sham. Kamala Harris can't win. I'm not giving you any more money. Grant Cardone, who is a real estate developer in New York and marketing and personal development guru, lifelong Democrat, came out and said, this is ridiculous. This is not democracy. I will not support you. This is ridiculous. Kamala cannot win. Black Lives Matter came out and said they will not support Kamala Harris because she was not elected by any primary voters. So you've already got people coming out that the Democrats, one, were relying on for money, and two, in the case of Black Lives Matter, relying on for votes in the general election, already coming out and saying, no, this is not what democracy is. We will not support Kamala Harris. So I think that's
isn't it bigger also with the entire, actually, especially with black women? They just immediately, they talk about being liberals being racially biased. I'll just use that term. They just assumed because she was a person of color, she's not completely African American at all, that blacks who are African Americans would just jump to her support.
No,
it's not happening.
Social media has been filled with African American men and women coming out and saying they will not support Kamala Harris. They didn't like her to begin with. They didn't like her when she was Attorney General of California. They didn't like her when she was a senator from California. They refused to support her when she ran for president in 2020. Why the Democrats think they were going to change their mind now and suddenly support her is beyond me. And let's take a look also. A lot of people who actually know Kamala Harris and have worked with her over the past 4 years have come out giving descriptions of her. The nicest thing any of them said is that she's an intellectual lightweight. It gets much more negative from there. Her staff as vice president, she has had higher turnover than any vice president in history. And they all said the same thing, because she treats her staff horribly.
Well, because she's entitled. She never really worked for anything, but that's a whole completely different story. I actually heard an extremely funny little tidbit of her staff leaked, or people that left, that she was going to be at some dinner, with diplomats, and the staff had to actually recreate beforehand that dinner. Go ahead.
Yes, I heard that same story. They had to create a mock dinner for her so that she would be able to handle herself during the actual event. Now, Joe Biden, in his resignation, initially did not endorse Kamala Harris, and then later came out with an endorsement of her. And of course, they had a phone call with her in Delaware, where he said he had complete faith in her. Let's look at this. The White House staff, and I'm talking about Biden's staff, not Kamala's. The White House staff has said repeatedly that Kamala Harris refused to take on any task that had any risk involved with it. She didn't want to do anything where she could be perceived as a failure. Her own staff said that she refused to do the homework that was necessary for some of her appearances, for most of her appearances. So she does not want to do the work. Now, let's take a good look at Biden's faith in her. Joe Biden named Kamala Harris as AI czar. She was responsible for crafting policy dealing with artificial intelligence. And when the heads of the AI companies came to the White House to discuss policy and how they could self-regulate, Joe Biden sent Kamala Harris to California. She was supposed to be in charge of this. And when the people actually building AI came to talk about it, Biden sent her the hell out of Dodge. This is the faith that he had in her.
And you ever see the little video excerpt of, and it's a real one. It's almost like a Saturday Night Live skit before they went woke. And it's her with dignitaries from around the world, and she's saying, we're all at this meeting to address, very important issues. I'm Kamala. I'm a woman. I'm in a blue suit, and my pronouns. I mean, come on, how can you take someone serious?
It was absolutely ridiculous. And I don't know who said it, but it just cracked me up. I heard somebody on some TV channel. I wasn't paying attention at the time, but they started talking about Kamala Harris. It was one of the news programs. And the guest said, nobody wants a head of lettuce for president. And that's all she is. Every time she opens her mouth, it's word salad. And they said this, and I just started laughing. It's like, this wasn't a pundit saying it. This was a person off the street.
Yes, it's interesting. So how do you think this plays out? She has the bump. The other thing that has not been addressed yet, because it's a honeymoon, coronation, whatever you want to, liberal mainstream corporate media is on board with this. They destroyed on purpose because that was their mission, Uncle Joe, and now it's time to make love to Kamala. But the record is the record. And before you get onto her record, I also find it troubling that no one asks Democrats when they say he's got, Uncle Joe's leaving and his record was unparalleled. They just let it go. I think it's a really stupid thing, almost dereliction of duty as a journalist. Probe and say, what about his record is so stellar? Could you please elaborate? But they don't. I find that frustrating as someone that's in the media.
The media has been derelict in their duties since he was nominated. We've already heard that reporters started getting indications that he was not mentally there from Biden's own staff as early as 2021. Chuck Todd himself, the political analyst on NBC News, said that Biden staffers were talking about this in 2021, and reporter after reporter did not follow up on this. Why? Because they were afraid to give validity to what they called a right-wing talking point. Well, guess what? It wasn't a right-wing talking point. It was the truth. So the fact that they're derelict in their duty now about questioning why they considered Biden's record stellar doesn't even surprise me. And I mean, let's face it, Trump has actually been focusing on the issues, especially over the last few days since Kamala has been anointed. All he has to do is keep focusing on illegal immigration and the border, because she was the border czar and she did nothing. Her big accomplishment was to go on television and say, don't come here.
Yes, that was quite an amazing feat, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And I love it when Lester Holt, he's actually destroyed more by Biden and Kamala when he said with Kamala 2 years ago, well, have you been to the border? And she lied and said, yes, I've been to the border. And then he goes, but you haven't. And she goes, well, I haven't been to Europe either. It was unbelievable. Yes. Plus, speaking out of propensity to lie, she had this BS story about when she was a kid and she went to her mother and says, Mommy, I want freedom, like meaning freedom, right? And it was ripped off from a discussion from Martin Luther King, who he said that he was at a march and a young kid, young kid, went up to him and said, I want freedom. I mean, she has no shame of doing anything to empower her.
No, she doesn't. She is no better than Joe Biden. In fact, in many ways, she's worse, because we could honestly say that Joe Biden, while he had a long history of lying, didn't actually start making up stories out of thin air until his mind started failing him. Now, we've got somebody who's no brighter than Biden was, except she doesn't have a cognitive difficulty. This is just her. And I find it amazing. Joy Reid went on television on this weird rant saying, if you're Black and you don't support Kamala Harris, you're going to look weird. It's just going to look weird for you not to be supporting her. And all I kept thinking of was Joe Biden in 2020 saying, if you don't vote for me, you ain't Black.
Pretty close, but that's how the liberal mind is. They think all Blacks are the same. Talk about racist. Everyone's like, everyone's the same. Everyone thinks the same. How demeaning can you get? And I think about Charles Payne, the person you used to work with a while back, the Fox Business journalist, basically saying he never met more or encountered more overt racism than in liberal areas like New York City, when they patronize him. Oh, yes, Charles, you can do this, or you must be oppressed. It's just unbelievable.
It really is. It is fascinating watching this. And now, they think all the Democratic constituencies are now going to come back because they have a black woman. And I know a number of African Americans, and I've actually heard a couple of pundits say this also. She's not African American, she's actually West Indian. So there's a lot of
Yes, yes,
African Americans that do not identify with her at all.
and it's also interesting. She keeps writing this narrative. That's how. Yeah, actually, her only shining moment during her 2020 crash and burn efforts in to seek the Democratic nomination is when she has all this thing. Oh, I was one of those girls on the school. No, your father was a professor. Blah blah blah. The list goes on. It's a bunch of crap.
Yeah, she makes up that, oh, she suffered. So, no, she didn't. She was upper class from the beginning. She was handed. We saw in 2020 the head of the California Democratic State Committee in an interview in Politico magazine admit that the only reason she became the attorney general and got that nomination and
Willie
why
Brown.
she was nominated for the Senate seat was because he was sleeping with her.
There you go. She was 29. What a romance. She was 29. He was 60. She was hooking up with him for his true romantic abilities. I'm sure of that. There's no question in my mind. As well as you, Dr. Lockton, correct? It was true love.
Oh, of course
it was. Almost like a Hallmark Christmas special. There you go. But then getting back to the record, we talk about Uncle Joe's record, a dismal record as president. But then you have to look at Kamala's record, okay? She is left. They took out Bernie Sanders, okay? The Democrats did the party of democracy, took him out because he was going to win, or potentially looked like he was going to win. She is left of Bernie Sanders. She's into getting rid. I mean, the list is just unbelievable. Against fracking, wants EV mandate. How is EV mandates going to work in Detroit?
Yeah.
How is anti-fracking going to work in Pennsylvania?
Is that her policies? And she has talked briefly about them over the past few days, but her policies are going to alienate the Rust Belt. They are going to keep her from winning Pennsylvania, Michigan, Ohio, because she wants to put all of these folks out of business.
Yes, so I find it interesting, and I think, now, what do you think of this? That I believe her only way to navigate some way to get to the White House is to speak in broad generalities. Democracy, inclusion. Well, the list goes on. Do you think that's going to work? I mean, in other words, not getting any specifics about any of her approaches or policies or lack thereof, just talking broad generalities.
Well, I don't even think she has any idea about how her ideas would work. Some of these ideas that she has floated in the past, such as universal basic income, such as Medicare for all, these would actually bankrupt the country. And by the way, as somebody who has had to deal quite a lot with Medicare, anybody who is in favor of Medicare for all has never dealt with Medicare. I mean, this is absolutely ridiculous. And again, I don't think she's even going to focus on the broad strokes. Based on the speeches she's given over the past 2 days, I think all she's going to be focusing on is Trump is a criminal. Trump is a convicted felon. Trump is a danger to democracy. Meanwhile, you've got Trump, who literally took a bullet for democracy.
Yeah, and it's also interesting. Don't push a button that you don't want to push, because when she's talking about being, her whole shtick now is that she's a prosecutor and he's a felon. You don't want to really touch too much on your record as a prosecutor. Probably not. That's just my humble opinion. What do you think, Dr. Lopkin?
No, it's actually going to backfire on her because the only
There
real
you go.
support she has is from the left. Well, left-leaning pundits have actually said she needs to not talk about her days as a prosecutor because everything she did was against the left. It's going to alienate the black market. It's going to alienate all of these incredibly liberal left-wingers that, want prison reform and want judicial reform, because she was the antithesis of all of this. So that's going to alienate the only base she has. And let's not forget, talk about alienating bases. Her stepdaughter has been raising money for Hamas. How do you think that's going to play in the Jewish community?
Not really too well, and especially when her approach to Israel is beyond belief. I mean,
the first
she's totally into reversing our support for Israel in large measure.
Yeah, the first decision she made as a candidate was that she was going to do a campaign stop instead of doing her job as vice president and presiding over the joint session of Congress where Benjamin Netanyahu was going to address them. This, by the way, is a historic speech because it is the first time that any foreign leader has addressed a joint session of Congress 4 times. Winston Churchill only addressed Congress 3 times. And her first decision was, I don't need to be there. Doesn't matter that I'm vice president and I'm supposed to be in charge there. Somebody else can do this. I'm going to go on the campaign trail.
Well, doesn't that bring the bigger issue up that, for our Jewish listeners out there, you may want to rethink about supporting Kamala and the Democratic Party because your party, members of your party, in fact, I think it's 60 members of your party have boycotted, as we speak, Netanyahu's address to a joint session.
Yeah, it's absolutely unforgivable. They seem to have forgotten that the Jewish vote, it was for years incredibly important to the Democratic Party. And like the African American vote, like the Hispanic vote, they have just taken it for granted and they have done nothing to help the Jewish community, the African American community, the Hispanic community. And the further left they go, the less help they're giving these communities. So they're actually turning their backs on the voters that have gotten them where they are, while at the same time, Donald Trump is actively reaching out to these communities. No Democrat on a national level has ever held a rally in the South Bronx before Donald Trump. There was, and I can't remember where it was, there was an African-American church that Donald Trump spoke at, that the Reverend actually said to him, "Thank you for coming. No one has ever come to listen to us before."
Yeah, no, it's all absolutely all there. It's just very interesting. I just don't understand, why the support continues, but that's another issue. I think it is absolutely diminishing, especially after looking at the RNC convention. But kind of on a lighter note, how do you think Dr. Jill is reacting to all this? I mean, she basically was probably measuring up her new drapes and her new ensemble that she was going to have for her photo shoot at Vanity Fair, but it's all gone, isn't it? Goodbye.
Well, no, I think this is probably the best thing that could have happened to Jill Biden. Because the longer Joe stayed in the race, the more people blamed her for elder abuse. Now, oh, yes, he decided to, as a family, we decided to do what was best for the country and step aside. And now she can get her book deals back. Now she can get her motivational speaking gigs back. Where before she
Yeah,
was a
maybe she get her part-time job at the community college back.
right, before she was a pariah. Now she can actually resurrect herself as, she was the first lady that helped Joe Biden come to see the light about how important it was for him to recuse himself and to hand the reins over to the next generation.
Well done, because she's always putting America first, isn't she?
Oh, absolutely. Again, Joe Biden was forced out. I don't even know if he made the decision. There were a lot of questions about that. And in fact,
That would
the Babylon Bee, which is an incredibly funny humor magazine, posted on social media the news headline: Biden's staff struggles to figure out how to tell Joe Biden that he has withdrawn from the presidential election.
Probably, sometimes humor isn't so far from the truth, and I wouldn't be shocked. I think yes, it was a definite coup attempt. Why hasn't Obama endorsed Kamala yet?
Well, Obama actually has a long history of this. I don't think it has anything to do with Kamala. Obama has never endorsed a national figure until after the convention, when they were officially the candidate. And quite frankly, that's how it should be. The Democratic Party should not be choosing sides. They should be allowing the voters. And it's not just the Democratic Party. In many states, Connecticut included, both the Democratic and the Republican parties choose who they want to be their candidate before the primary. And if you want to primary the candidate, you have to fight the whole party. That's not how it should be. And it's not that way in every state. New York State, for example, the parties actually stay out of it until after the primary, when the voters choose who the candidate is. So Obama did the right thing. It's these other Democrats who are jumping on the Harris bandwagon before she's confirmed for the convention that are doing it wrong.
Well, when I think of Obama, I think of a political operative.
Oh, absolutely.
And I believe that he was part of the coup, but he wants to step away and remain innocent, because that's his whole shtick. While he's spying on Trump, he shakes his hand and says, "I'll help you with the transition." That's part of the modus operandi that I'm sure he learned from Bill Ayers and his time as a community organizer. There you go. Before we leave the Kamala for the time being, your thoughts on the election. I get back, I know I've already mentioned it, to there was a Fox News correspondent who said that they jumped too soon. Just your thoughts right now as we speak, 2 days into it, which is very soon, but just your overall thoughts now.
Yeah, it is really too soon to say, but the Vegas odds have Kamala's chances of winning at, I believe it was 32%. This
Up
is
from Uncle Joe's 8, though.
Right. This is with this honeymoon period and everybody going rah, 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 we're all united now. So I don't think she has any better odds than Biden did of beating Trump. And she's actually shooting the Democratic Party in the foot. And to be fair, they're doing it to themselves, because they all made a very big show right after the assassination attempt of saying, yes, we've got to lower the temperature on the rhetoric. We've got to bring the country together. And Trump has actually been doing that. He rewrote his convention speech to focus on bringing the country together. All of his campaign stops, he's talked about unity. He's talked about how this has to end and we have to bring everybody together. And as soon as Kamala got the delegates, she immediately went right back to, oh, he's a convicted felon, he's a threat to democracy. And in every poll,
well, we've already talked about that's all she has, Dr.
Right, but in every
literally
poll,
all she has.
Right, but in every poll, this has turned off voters. They have the polling data that shows voters want to hear what you're going to do about inflation. They want to hear what you're going to do about the border. The whole threat to democracy tripe doesn't hold water. When they list what they're concerned about, that comes in at like 8th, I think, in the last polls.
Which means zero, if you really want to look at it. I can't name 8 issues, but that's my pea brain. You talk about Trump taking a bullet for democracy. The Secret Service director, an amazing executive, just dropped out. I don't know why she encountered what she did. I would have done it before then. It was kind of inevitable. But your thoughts, and the FBI will give us a full assessment, I'm sure, of what happened in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, you want to talk about unity? This was the first truly bipartisan thing we have seen in 12 years, possibly longer. The Democrats and Republicans united calling for her resignation because her performance in this was abysmal. And they were able to debunk almost every excuse she gave. She didn't even go to the site saying, well, it's an active crime scene, I can't go in there to ruin things. Congressmen went there. There was no security. It was no sealed crime scene. Even more interesting than her resigning, though. I mean, now we're being told that the Secret Service does not have enough manpower to cover all of the people. So they shortchanged Donald Trump's protection, even knowing that there was an active threat against him from Iran, in favor of protecting Jill Biden. Now,
Dr. Jill.
Right. What I'm waiting on, and I'm hoping that whatever is going to happen actually comes out. It might not. But representatives of the Butler Police Department have told the FBI and several congressmen that they need to discuss with them in person items about the Secret Service's behavior on that day. So hopefully we will find out what it is that's got the local PD so concerned about what the Secret Service was doing.
Yeah, very interesting. Although the former director now was trying to throw the Butler Police Department and the Pennsylvania State Police under the bus. And also, what do you think? I love this part. The pitched roof, that was unbelievable. You'd have, heroes in the past, and basically the pitched roof, which is like a 1-degree pitch. That's pretty unbelievable.
Yeah, it was ridiculous. It was, saying they couldn't do anything because of the sloped roof. The joke just became that the Secret Service is now looking for roofing professionals to join the Secret Service.
There you go. Yes, like I said, I told my friend who's a roofer, go for it.
Yeah, it's abysmal. This is, and again, this is the same problem we now have with our military. It's the same problem we have with so many government agencies. When you focus on DEI, you don't get the best and the brightest. You need to hire the best, especially in something like the Secret Service, where literally lives are at stake, regardless of their race, creed, color, gender. You just want the best. You should not be putting quotas saying we need 30% of Secret Service agents to be women. You know what? If these 30% that are women are strong women who are capable of taking a bullet and acting on a moment's notice, that's great, fine. But I don't want to see, which we did see at the assassination, a 5'2" female Secret Service agent next to the overweight Secret Service agent next to the president. And if you take a look at the photo at the moment, you have one Secret Service agent guarding Trump, pushing him out of the way, and this female agent ducking to save her own life. That is not who we want in the Secret Service. And I don't care if it would have been a 5'2" male, overweight, doing the same thing. That is not who we need in the Secret Service. We need to stop hiring to fill quotas and go back to a meritocracy where we get the best people we can.
Agreed 100%. Speaking of the best people we can have, Gen Z, when I was out of college in the 80s, the Reagan era, it was DINKS and all these other abbreviations or whatever. And it was dual income, no kids. Now we have with Gen Z, it's called NEETs. No employment, education, or training or training/certifications. And that means it completely dropped out of anything with essentially no ambition whatsoever. And it's 20% of the Gen Z population. Little alarming, I would say.
Well, I'm actually going to go out on a limb and say it's probably a lot higher than that, because most of the Gen Zers who have gone to our elite Ivy League universities also have no education and no training and, no employment, because they didn't learn anything that's going to be of value in the real world. And we're starting to see that in the job market. Now, it is very difficult for a recent grad to find a job, partially because the economy is shifting and partially because they're not prepared to do anything.
Yes, and let's go one step further. You talk about the NEETs. I love this because you're Ivy League, elite, spoiled brat. Yes, when they were involved in the Palestinian protests, they went from first class to cargo because their chances of getting a job are the same chances of me playing Major League Baseball. Zero.
Pretty much. I mean, I remember, I can't remember. I'm blanking on his name, from Shark Tank.
O'Leary.
Yes, Kevin O'Leary. Kevin O'Leary was actually talking about this, about the fact that thanks to AI, even with the masks and the burqas and all of the other things, they can still identify who these students were. And when they run background checks, and let's face it, except for the most basic entry-level positions like cashier or, McDonald's worker, everybody gets a fairly intensive background check now. They can tell who these folks were, and they are not going to be hired. So you've got
100%. Any job now, any job has the extremely thorough background check, like any kind of salesperson, you name it, anything that has any responsibility, maybe even working at a Mac store. How do you like that? An Apple store.
Yeah, it's becoming more and more common. And you have to understand that for the potential employer, they hire companies that do this on a regular basis. And these companies don't just run a traditional credit check. They do a credit check. They run checks on social media. They go on the dark web to find out what else is out there about you. These are incredibly detailed. And the only thing that some of these don't do anymore, and it depends on what state you're in, is drug testing. And some, even, I mean, like here in Connecticut, nobody drug tests for pot anymore because it's legal. But there's still drug tests for heroin, opiates, other drugs. You have to pass all of these tests before they will make you an offer.
Well, I just think it's, karma's a bitch. And I think it's great, especially that, let's say, a little chunky Columbia Hamas spokesperson who demanded hummus and gluten-free pizza and wanted access to her meal plan. I think that's really great after spending $300,000 on an education that you'll be now living in a basement. Couldn't happen soon enough. And you did mention the job market. Basically, you mentioned the fact that, it's harder now to get a job as a young person, right, out of college. And basically, people are jumping ship less, aren't they?
Yes, we've seen a major shift in the job market. People are not quitting jobs as quickly as they did. And even the phenomenon of quiet quitting, where they were going to work every day but doing as little as they could, that has fallen by the wayside because it is very hard to find another job now. They're not terribly worried about being laid off yet. We haven't seen major layoffs, but we have seen huge cutbacks in hiring. We've seen the unemployment rate start to tick back up. So the job market was touted by the Biden administration as proof that Bidenomics was working. It was showing how strong the economy is. Well, guess what? Over the last several weeks, the job market has started to close up. We've seen record high prices in the housing market. At the same time, we're seeing home sales drop for the first time in quite a while. So all of these strong economic indicators that he kept pushing, they're falling by the wayside.
Yeah, and that's a very interesting point, and has a bigger implication for the Harris campaign, because she was supposedly, as we speak, with the mainstream corporate media, invigorating the youth vote. Well, if you're not getting a job, not quite sure that's really going to happen. Correct?
Well, I mean, it's possible, because if she's pushing her universal basic income proposal, if you can't find a job, you're going to jump all over that. That's going to be great to you because somebody's going to pay you to do nothing. But overall, I don't think she's going to make great instrides into any particular group. She does not have the policies that are going to support them. And as we've seen over and over in the Biden administration, the policies that they do put in place to try to buy younger voters are all being struck down in the courts because they're illegal. They don't have the power to do it. These are things that have to be passed in the Congress. We just saw once again Biden's student loan forgiveness has been halted by the courts because he did not have the ability to do this. And now that the Supreme Court has reversed the Chevron decision, limiting what the administration, the administrative agencies can do in rulemaking, more of this is going to have to be taken up by the Congress. And they don't seem to be all that eager to pass any of these things.
I would agree with that. And as we speak, the spokesman, Jean Pierre, said that she does not think that Biden will be a lame duck president. I don't think the sky is blue, Dr. Lopkin.
Yeah, I love that Biden also said, he's going to be active now. He's going to be on the campaign trail for Harris, and he's going to be passing legislation. Really, he thinks he's going to get anything at this point past the Republican-controlled...
That did catch my eye, Dr. Lopkin. Legislation.
Yeah,
couldn't
like,
pass legislation to paint doghouses.
right, he thinks he's going to get anything past the Republican-controlled House. And let's remember, the Senate only had a 1-vote majority for the Democrats, unless Kamala Harris had the deciding vote. Well, guess what? Democratic Senator Bob Menendez is about to leave the Senate. He is scheduled to leave because he was convicted of criminal activity and bribery and collusion. He's supposed to leave by August 10th, which means they don't even have the votes in the Senate to get anything passed.
Yeah, but I get that. That's the logistics of it. Even if he had a Democratic Senate, he's not getting anything. No one needs, because Washington responds to power. He has none.
Yeah, he is a lame duck president at this point. And he's not going to get anything passed. And I don't honestly think the Republicans are going to get anything passed at this point either. But that's basically it. Between now and January 20th, Congress is shut down for the season. They'll be holding hearings. They'll be trying to impeach each other, but that's about it. They're not actually going to get the work of the people done. And I put this blame squarely on both parties.
No question about it. And speaking of the people, did you see that that tweet that Chucky Schumer sent out about, I think it was about, he just bought a house and he was going to go grilling, but he took it down because people pointed out that, first of all, the cheese was put on while the burgers were still raw and there was no fire. Other than that, it was a great barbecue.
Yeah, that was his 4th of July tweet. He was soundly mocked for this. And I think that is the major problem that the Democrats are having. They're all about pushing the right image rather than actually doing something. And this is actually why the Biden administration has gotten into such legal trouble with the courts over the policies that they have tried to implement without the Congress. It seems fairly obvious at this point that at least 3/4 of the Congress, both the House and the Senate, both parties, don't actually want to make any decisions. They don't actually want to do their jobs. And I think
and I also think for me, it hit home that the Democrats, supposedly the party of the people, yes, okay, in a Wayback Machine, are not. Nancy Pelosi, the person that went into Congress worth $100,000, is now worth $10 million. Chucky Schumer, these people never barbecued a burger. They're elitist, out of touch morons, quite frankly.
It just came out that when Kamala Harris entered the Senate, she had $120,000. She is now a multimillionaire. Somebody explain to me how that happened.
Well, also explain to me how you can be a DA and blah, 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 and only be worth $120,000, but that's another issue. That's why you want universal income. Dr. Lopkin, another great podcast, and our listeners, as always, can contribute to the show, can't they?
Yes, they can. Go to the Carnivore Radio Facebook page. Message us there. You can also go to the brand new xvadio.com/connect. Let's hear from you. Tell us you want to talk to us about Carnivore Radio, and let us know your opinions. And of course, you can catch every episode of Carnivore Bites at xvadio.com, the Carnivore Radio website, the Apple Podcast app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and other platforms that respect freedom of speech.
Thank you, Dr. Lopkin. See you next week.
We'll see you then.